Hello everyone, this is Harrison and this is going to be a presentation on supporting help seeking in CS1 and the work I did towards this in spring quarter. So before we get started, let's just ask the question, why are we interested in this space? So why explore CS1? Well, pretty big talking point for this, but one that is quite true is that CS is in high demand, both in the industry, people want software engineers, and also academically, people want to be CS majors, and as such, CS courses have gotten extremely large and popular. But on top of this is the fact that CS tends to be pretty hard for a lot of students, and students often are going to struggle. And so when we look at CS1 or Intro CS, we see that this is kind of the biggest part of the funnel into CS, and it's the entryway into CS. And so this is where the most students are being exposed to computer science, especially for the first time. And this is where a lot of students start struggling. And students who do struggle might not decide to pursue computer science later. A lot of them don't. And so getting them the support they need as soon as possible in CS1 is important if we want people to be able to get through computer science. The next question is, why would we look into the help-seeking component of computer science? Well, metacognition is an important part of the learning process. Students who have stronger metacognitive skills usually excel compared to their peers who don't. And in particular, one metacognitive skill, the ability to seek help or help seeking, basically being able to recognize when you need help and then go about it, is particularly important when students are going to need help a lot. And this is going to be very true in a setting like CS1, where students are novices and thus will inevitably have lots of gaps in their knowledge and need some kind of support to overcome these gaps. And then finally, something we already know from prior work is that students don't help seek well at the moment. In particular, they don't help seek instrumentally, or in other words, don't seek help in ways that are best for their learning. So a student who helps seek instrumentally doesn't just want to have their current problem be overcome by the help they're getting. They want to learn the knowledge or skills necessary to overcome that problem on their own now and similar types of problems later down the line. They're not just passing off a problem to a helper and asking them to solve it for them. And then finally, okay, so if help seeking is so important to CS1, why is it still a problem right now if it's so key? Well, there has been prior work in the literature on help seeking in CS environments and in CS1, but it's been primarily limited to intelligent tutoring systems and programming environments like IDEs. More specifically, it's usually revolving around hint generation that's kind of automated. And in these settings, help seeking is reduced to basically the act of pushing a button to get some advice on how to move forward. And this really misses out on a lot of the types of help that students might ask for that generated hints can't really resolve at the moment. So going to office hours or asking for help on discussion forums like Piazza or CampusWire is something that's not really well encapsulated by the literature right now. So even though there's a recognition that it's important, we haven't really addressed it in the ways that are most salient. And then when we look at the more general help-seeking literature outside of CS, we find that while they can model this overall instrumental help-seeking approach to describe how help-seeking should happen, there is no current theory that models the actual process of asking for help. So when students actually engage in the help-seeking behavior, when they go to office hours or when they pose a question online, there aren't current theories that actually describe how students should do this, how we know if it's effective or not, beyond the general descriptions of what instrumental help-seeking looks like. And then finally, while there has been work that explores ways to support metacognitive processes in the computer science environment, such as for problem solving, these approaches haven't been tried out for help seeking yet. So we don't really have evidence yet of whether or not they'll work for this setting. So how have we tried to bridge this gap? Well, the previous quarter, winter quarter, I conducted a need finding study with CS1 students and TAs in an authentic office hours environment to see how help seeking is actually occurring. And then this quarter in the spring, I started prototyping and user testing novel approaches and existing approaches for helping students become better help seekers. During my need finding study, the big thing I found was that students and TAs do, in fact, struggle to have help seeking occur during office hours in an instrumental way, and they don't recognize when this happens. The three main areas where I saw this happening were that students would often give unclear problem descriptions that didn't really expand on what issues they were having very well. Students often either did not provide attempts of how they've tried to solve problems or just did not make attempts to solve their problems before asking for help. And then finally, students often would not scope their level of confusion when asking for help in ways that really got at their learning needs. So students who were stuck on a compiler error might say something like, I don't know how to solve this bug, when in fact there are probably certain things that they understood about the debugging process, but they never specified which aspects they were stuck on within the debugging process. And then finally, when I actually talked to students and TAs about what help actually occurred, the biggest theme across all the participants was that they didn't really recognize or have awareness of this poor help seeking. They seem to not know how to, they seem to not be able to notice when help seeking wasn't instrumental. So in order to help provide a clear set of criteria so that students and TAs can really diagnose and identify the quality of a help request, I came up with the PAC framework. And this maps pretty much directly to the results that I found in my study. But basically, the PAC framework is problem, attempt, and confusion, and encourages students and TAs to consider how clear is the context described, are attempts shared, what are they, and what are the particular learning needs that actually need to be addressed by the help that's about to be asked. So to implement PAC and to help students develop this stronger awareness of instrumental help seeking, I've considered two approaches. So the first is my own, which is a self-evaluation approach. And in this approach, students basically give their current thoughts on their help seeking plans at the moment, and then assess and self-evaluate these plans using the PAC framework, basically rating across problem, across attempt, across confusion, and then revise their plans based on the ratings they've gotten, with some guidance from automated tips based on those ratings. And then finally, when students actually go and seek help, so the previous stuff is done before they seek help, TAs once again walk through PAC with the student to do a quick, not as in-depth evaluation of each of those components, just so that the TA also gets practice recognizing good help requests. The other approach is called an explicit guidance approach, or at least that's what the authors call it. And in this one, students receive instruction on the metacognitive activity, in this case help seeking, in advance. So this is done through a mini lecture basically, and an activity where students learn about instrumental help seeking, they learn about the different components of it, and then they practice implementing it in this toy scenario. Then when students are actually working, they're given a worksheet to help track their help seeking components, the PAC components. So basically have some problem, attempt, confusion worksheet. And then finally, before students actually ask for help, TAs then prompt them to share these components again, basically from the worksheet. So this is what the prototypes look like at the moment. On the left, you have the self-evaluation approach. At the top, students kind of give their initial thoughts, rate them, and then revise. And on the right, you have the explicit guidance approach, at least the worksheet part of it, where you kind of have these problem, attempt, confusion fields, and some guiding questions that students can kind of track on their own before asking for help. So in order to actually make sure that these designs are useful and that they help students become more aware, I wanted to user test both of them. And so the goals of this were really to see, after using these types of tools, with what degree of clarity do students have of the instrumentality of their help seeking? How much detail can they provide when they're describing the help that occurred and the context around it? And I'm less focused on actually the quality of their help requests, although I think it's important that they are able to form good help requests. The other things I'm interested in during my user testing were what exactly were the characteristics that helped contribute to this awareness, if it did exist, because both approaches kind of have a handful of different characteristics in play, and some might be more or less useful or unnecessary. And finally, if there are other things besides just awareness that help form help requests. So if students say, do express clear awareness but are still giving poor help requests, there might indicate a new obstacle. And finally, there might just be these usability problems that I want to work out by actually testing with users for each design. So to do this, I basically just had participants use the tool as they would when asking for help before and during, and then afterwards ask them about kind of, okay, what did you do? How did that help go? What were your thoughts on that? And then finally, to try and get an idea of what characteristics actually contributed to that, ask them what led them to their thoughts. So I might say, so one thing that might have happened, for example, is a student says like, oh, I was working on, or one thing I realized with my help request was that I didn't specify really what I was confused by and what I was stuck on. And that was something I needed to clarify. And then I would follow up with, okay, so what made you have this realization? And they might have said like, oh, during the self-evaluation, when I was scoring myself, I realized that my score is really low and that I need to make a change. Actually, that is something that happened. But yeah, so that's the overall procedure. So when I tested the self-evaluation design, and I did this with 3 people, good thing for the PAC framework, everybody seemed to understand it pretty easily. There were no confusions. It seems pretty intuitive, and I think it maps pretty closely to what someone might come up with on their own without even needing any research. And then something that was also very promising is that the self-evaluation process, all of the participants cited it as something that triggered them and caused them to realize that their help seeking was insufficient in some kind of way and to address that particular problem. So, for example, one of the participants stated that when they self-evaluated the confusion component of their help requests, they thought that was particularly useful because they were able to realize, oh, I asked for help, but I didn't even say really what's the thing that I need help with. Just doing an eye test, looking at the before and afters of this process, all the participants definitely formed clearer and better help requests afterwards. But one of the participants did mention that they were hesitant to kind of pack, no pun intended, all of the pack components into a help request. Just kind of, they didn't think it was necessary to rattle off the prom and the attempt and the confusion all at once, which was interesting in that they did do that. They did form a better help request, but it apparently was not clear to the student how this was going to improve the help seeking process for them, how it's more likely to get them instrumental help. And then finally, something I observed as the role of a helper in these user tests was that trying to manage very much else besides giving help during help seeking was quite challenging. So trying to evaluate the students' help requests in real time while also trying to listen to what they needed help with was not something that was easy to do. And so in a later revision of my prototype, where the evaluation process during help was done with the student in a more lightweight way, that seemed to help a lot. Is something that I think makes the flow cleaner, is doing that together with the student. And then for the explicit guidance side, I only was able to test this with one participant, but they also found the PAC framework easy to understand. And something that was interesting is that when I talked to them after the user test, the ways that they talked about their help seeking process were much more general than I had noticed than I had observed earlier. So, for example, when I asked them about how they went about getting help, they just said, "Oh, I asked for and I got feedback," something very broad, and not saying like, "Okay, how did you determine what kind of feedback to give?" Um, Something like that, like I asked for feedback on X because Y or whatever. Those kinds of details were not present. And furthermore, they also, unlike the previous participants, did not make any comments about how the help seeking they did could have been improved, or where or how it could have been improved. They just kind of were content with their help seeking. However, looking at the actual worksheet responses they gave and the help request information that they gave during the help, it did mirror the quality of the revised help requests that the students made during self-evaluation. And so something that's kind of interesting here is that it seems like uh, the explicit guidance, if you tell students what to do, they will do it and they'll follow it and they'll come up with a positive result, but they might not be thinking as critically about it. This is my hypothesis, that they might not be thinking as critically about it when they do it. So they'll get the end result, but they might not actually build the awareness. Whereas in the self-evaluation process, without me telling students how to improve it, just having them evaluate it, they seem to be able to figure out what they need to do on their own based on the criteria, but do it in a way where they're more aware and deliberate of how they're improving it. So because they're kind of going from a not so great help request to a better one versus just going straight to a better one, they kind of calculate the delta between those more clearly. At least that's what I think is what's happening. And then the final thing I wanted to note with this was that in the explicit guidance, the TA role is pretty easy to do because you're just kind of prompting students to rattle off these three things that you ask them. The TA just kind of takes the role of a guidance person as well, which I think has an interesting question of if explicit guidance can help TAs practice awareness, because the TAs are just kind of doing what they're told to, and then passing that on to the student. So moving forward into this summer quarter, the big things that I want to do are definitely more user tests in a couple ways. So first, I want to test the explicit guidance approach more. I only have a sample size of 1. It's not really enough to come up with major conclusions, although I think there's interesting hints of what's going on there. And I want to test in more authentic CS1 settings. So I've been coordinating. Hopefully I can get something going with UW. And I think I'm going to try and contact some professors at UIUC over the summer too. But being able to see this occur in a CS1 setting, a real office hour setting, and not just in the DTR setting where I was doing this, I think could help verify if I was even seeing things in the right direction, and also get a better idea of what types of questions and stuff that are more like authentically CS1, how those play out. And then based on all of that, I want to, of course, improve my prototypes based on the findings there. And finally, I want to prepare and be ready to actually do a more formal study that could be in a paper later on, probably in the fall, and just kind of go through the IRB and whatnot for that. So yeah, those are my plans. Oh, and one final thought is just in the authentic setting, because I have been taking the role of the helper in the user tests I've done, I really want to see how a real TA would actually handle this. So that's another thing. But yeah, that's a summary of how the quarter went and what I'm looking towards right now. Thanks for watching.